Hi, I'm Dan Newman, and I'm a failure. Let me introduce you to one of my failures. This is a spigot. Well, it was supposed to be one. Like many of you homebound during the quarantine, I've taken on a number of home projects. One of them was to install an outdoor spigot so I could water my garden. My tomatoes were getting thirsty, and I had to schlep up and down the stairs with every bucket full of water. It was exhausting, and I thought I could do it better. Even though I wouldn't call myself a home contractor, I do consider myself a professional learner, and thought I could learn my way through this home project. It can't be that hard. There are YouTube videos on how to do it. I got this. After the third trip to the hardware store on the same day with this to show for my efforts, you can imagine I was not proud of my results. Angry? Yes. Disappointed? Yes. Embarrassed to show my face to the hardware guys? Triple yes. But like I said, I'm a professional learner. I learned that pipes come in different sizes. I learned that the threading for pipes and hoses are different. I learned that there exists copper pipe, black pipe, PEX pipe, PVC pipe, all kinds of pipes. In this talk, I am not going to teach you about how to do it yourself plumbing. I could probably talk about how not to do it yourself, but let's save that for later. See, I had to admit to myself 3 times that day, and multiple times leading up to that day and after that day, that I had failed. The first step of learning from failure is simply admitting that you failed, and that you recognize it as a failure. That spigot didn't turn out how I wanted, and clearly was not achieving the functionality I set out to do. And those poor thirsty tomatoes. Sometimes we set out to achieve certain outcomes, and they don't hit the mark. And we know it, but we still aren't sure why. We just know it's not what we wanted or intended. Recognize that despite your efforts to achieve a certain outcome, you still can't make it work. Put on a little growth mindset. You can recognize that you have a gift on your hands, not an incomplete spigot. Not only am I a professional learner, but I'm a successful failure. Failure is the only way you really learn. And while it's a lot of not fun to get there, being able to draw new insights from what doesn't work, or how innocuous events leads to tremendous mistakes, is just how we learn. Our biggest mistakes are our biggest sources of learning. Our biggest sources of learning are what makes us better leaders, better employees, better friends, better humans. Today, I'm going to show you how to be a successful failure. Okay, I admit it. I have a podcast. My thought partner and I do a podcast about failure, where we interview people about the biggest failures and how it changed their perspective. We've interviewed rock musicians, pizza shop owners, entrepreneurs, and just really nice people to hear their stories and learn from their mistakes. Here's a clip from our first episode where we interviewed a rock musician who had to completely reshape his identity after realizing his dream was destroying him. So, did everything go great for the rest of your life, or?
It's just been perfect.
Or I assume you're here to tell us about how that didn't turn out. Oh, man.
Yeah, it ended, fast forward to me lying on the floor of my studio at 33 years old in my house in Austin, Texas, going through, it's going to make me cry just talking about it. I mean, going through the most painful identity crisis the most painful crisis that I've been through other than my best friend dying when I was 23. And I remember thinking, this is worse than any breakup I've ever been through. This is a breakup. And I'm mourning a version of myself that I put everything, all of my self-confidence I put into this. I pushed it up a hill, like Sisyphean, just like I'm going for a version of myself that is really grandiose, and if I fail, I'm nothing.
As you can imagine, hearing story after story of failure leads you to start to see themes. One thing that we both have noticed is red flags. Red flags are those data points that indicate that things may not work out the way you want them to work out. Sometimes you're lucky enough to see them in advance, and then ignore them and feel a little dumb. More often, though, is that they don't show themselves as red flags until after a failure has happened. Every guest on our show has talked about this inflection point where they looked back and realized what went wrong. It's fascinating, really, that a lot of our guests took intentional breaks where they reflected and learned from their mistakes. They started to see the chain of causality that led to the fallout and were able to make new decisions in their lives to pivot and change. This is the second secret of how to be a successful failure. As I said before, step one is admitting that you have a problem or that you're the problem. Hopefully that identification comes with, gee, I guess I need to change and evolve. However, that change and evolve step requires that you reflect on your mistakes and identify the chain of causality that led to the failure. You have to find the red flags. Red flags could look like not hitting your sales targets, being unable to sleep, an unknown credit card transaction, a feeling in the knee.
The quarantine is a giant red flag.
I started a business around helping businesses retain their talent. If you can remember, before the quarantine, we were in a candidate's market. Employers were trying to find ways to keep their employees from leaving. For those of you at tech companies, it's not a foreign concept that a highly skilled engineer would leave a job simply to get a pay bump because they knew there was a demand for those skills. Here's what it looked like. In 2019, Gartner came out with this article saying that workers can expect a 15% compensation increase when switching companies. 15%. That's bananas. Now, before that, the concept, the idea was 10% was roughly how much you could expect moving from role to role. Well, take a look at what happens 10% by switching jobs. So if you assume a 3% standard increase, neither excelling nor underperforming, you can see the growth rate is kind of steady. But with that 10% bump by switching jobs, no wonder people are incentivized to leave their jobs. You can make so much more money, almost 50% more money, by switching jobs. Now, though, times have changed. The unemployment rate is literally off the chart. And when unemployment goes off the chart, the demand for jobs increases. And now there's so many more people vying for the same number of jobs, there's less of a buying power. There's less of a salary demand. People are just happy and thankful that they can keep their job. With all the layoffs and uncertainty wrought by COVID-19, employees are instead worrying about keeping their jobs, rather than their next big pay bump. It is a big change. It's a big red flag for a guy like me that nobody will want, let alone can spend, to try to entice employees to stay. Things have changed. I had to change. During those long nights where I stared at the ceiling with those thoughts in my head, I stewed on ideas.
How could I do what I'm passionate about? Helping people have amazing experiences when nobody seems to be able to afford or care about those things. Which led me to step 3. Here's step 3. You have to talk about the failure. You have to get out of your own head and out of your comfort zone to hear the wisdom and perspectives of others. You have to hear other stories of failure to start to see the threads that connect the red flags. Simply by identifying the progression of flags, either by journaling to yourself, talking with a close friend, or at a networking event. Which led me into the other F word. Not failure, fuck up.
There's an organization that talks about failure called Fuck Up Nights. It's a grassroots, chapter-based failure showcase. In your city, the local Fuck Up Nights chapter showcases a few people who are willing to get up on stage and talk about their failures. It's like a TED Talk after a few rounds at the bar. It's funny, it's humbling, it's unvarnished, and it's instrumental in making you and the people around you more successful. Let them explain.
This is the story of 5 friends. It was a Friday night in 2012 in Mexico City. After several mezcales, the friends decided they'd heard enough about success and each decided to share a story about their failed projects. The conversation was so inspiring that they decided to do it again, but this time with even more friends. 2 weeks later, they did it again. The 5 friends all invited their friends, and they asked 3 people to share their biggest failures. That was the first fuck-up night. Sharing stories of failure was liberating. It was fun and authentic. So the friends decided to keep it going and organize fuck-up nights once a month. Turned out that people all over the world wanted to bring fuck-up nights to their city. So the 5 friends decided to take their project seriously and set a goal: to bring fuck-up nights to the world. In April 2015, Fuck-Up Nights is celebrating reaching 100 cities all over the world, with a presence on every continent, except Antarctica. Today, Fuck-Up Nights is the most active creators movement on the planet. Each month, more than 10,000 people worldwide make time to go to Fuck-Up Nights and listen to 3 people publicly share their failures. The movement is dedicated to 3 kinds of people: those who have failed, those who will fail, and the liars. Free your failures. The world will thank you.
I was in the final stages of reigniting the Boston Fuck-Up Chapter when it became clear that a group gathering with booze and failure isn't going to fly when we're sheltering in place. Even though it looked like hosting an event wasn't going to happen, I was using the opportunity to reflect on my own failures. I was inspired to come up with my own failure story to open a show when I ironically realized that my red flags were looking right at me. I had a business failure on my hands. In the months leading up to this reflection, I had been spending a lot of time doing what I thought I should be doing. I was sending 1,000,000 cold messages to people on LinkedIn because that's what I thought a sales development rep would do. I was optimizing my website to get detailed analytics because that's what I thought a web marketing manager would do. I was trying to schmooze 1,000,000 people at networking events because I thought that's what a business development executive would do. Here are all the business cards I collected at events. How much new business did I get from this? 1 client. I was spending so much time shelving my skill set away instead of figuring out how to meet the needs of a new market. Using my unique skills, over 10 years of leading workshops, speaking at events, and helping people learn. I was stressed. I wasn't sleeping well. And my poor girlfriend, I'll go into that. With the quarantine red flag, I could either ignore it and continue swinging with the same strategy, or I could sit down and rethink things. I realized I was spending too much time doing things that were not producing results, and I was miserable doing them. Not only that, I do admit that employee retention was no longer the right positioning in a market where every other LinkedIn post is talking about being laid off and trying to stay positive. With this revelation that a change needed to happen, I talked with peers, former colleagues, mentors, my parents. I took the Sunday scaries and I wrote it all into a document and invited people to tell me what they thought of it. I chased down a few crazy ideas. I hosted my first free workshop. I met more people. I kept talking about this failure. And through talking about it, I realized that I had a great skill set for quarantine, running these remote workshops and panels. I had been doing it for the past 10 years. Why wasn't I spending my time running workshops instead of sending 1,000,000 cold call LinkedIn messages? Since I've made that pivot away from typical sales to workshops, speaking, coaching, I've closed more deals during 1 month of quarantine than in the 6 months before lockdown. Perhaps part of it is due to all the effort from before, and I'm open to admitting that. It's too early to say that these decisions are 100% right. We're all trying to make quarantine work, but I feel far more confident and driven with my choices. I feel like a success, even if all I am is a successful failure.
So, to recap, step 1. Admit that you made a mistake.
Reflect and identify the red flags. Talk about it. It's simple, though hard. It's straightforward, but backwards.
And of course, making the most of failure will not make you more successful today, but it will retroactively draw value and meaning from yesterday. You're playing the long game, my fellow failures. It may take a fourth trip to the hardware store to finish that home project, but there's so much wisdom you'll be able to share with your neighbor when they start their next project. Or yours. And may your failures be spectacular.